How does Fiddler work? Well, it acts as a proxy, and basically what a proxy is something that acts on your behalf. So in this case, if you work for a medium or large company, you might have a proxy server which is used to give you access to the internet. So for instance, all of the connections at your company get funneled through that proxy server on their way out to the internet. In the same way, Fiddler wants to attach itself as a proxy for your browser so that the browser will send all of its requests through that proxy and into Fiddler so Fiddler can do its tracing. So Fiddler is smart. It understands that your browsers may already have proxies configured so they chain any existing proxy servers. So for instance, now you start up Fiddler, and what Fiddler will do is it will tell the WinINet networking stack that it wants to act as a proxy for clients. Then when you start up your browser, the browser will get reconfigured to point its traffic to go through Fiddler, and that's how it's able to see all of the requests and responses. You can use it as a local proxy, so typically you'll have Fiddler run on the same machine as your browser, but it is also possible to run this remotely, so that if you had smartphones, tablets, or non-Windows platforms where you want to use Fiddler, Fiddler will only run on Windows, you can run Fiddler on your Windows machine, but have it be a remote proxy for these different devices or platforms so that you can still use Fiddler to do your tracing, and we'll get into that a little later in the course. So to adjust your browser's proxy configuration, one note, it's typical as a developer that you might be both the client and the web server on the same machine. Most of today's browsers are smart enough to understand that even if you're going to localhost or 127.0.0.1, you may still want to go through a proxy server. So with a lot of modern browsers, if you start Fiddler and you start doing a trace, even though it's local on your own machine where you're both the browser and the server, those will still be sent through Fiddler so you can do tracing. If it turns out in your case that your browser does not do that, there's a trick in Fiddler. There are some virtual names, IPv4.fiddler or IPv6.fiddler, depending on what version of IP you're using. But what you can do is you can enter that into the browser and it will go to the local host, but your browser sees the dot in that particular name and it interprets it as a non-local address, so it chooses to use the proxy server. So either way, you're able to use your browser and look at your local machine to capture traffic. And again, that's only a concern if you're both the client, browser, and server on the same physical machine. Normally, if you're looking at any internet-based website, you can just start Fiddler, start your browser, and everything will work as you would expect. Another note is that Fiddler is not a general wire or network monitor, so you don't need to be concerned with your security department or operations group, etc. You're not actually able to watch network traffic on your network segment. All you're able to do is run this on your own machine, and when you direct clients to come through Fiddler, you'll be able to trace and see the requests that are made. To see how Fiddler works, let's look at my browser prior to starting Fiddler. If we go into Internet Options, Connections, LAN Settings, you can see I presently don't have a proxy server configured. Now if I go back and start up Fiddler, if we see what has changed in IE, if I go back to Internet Options, you can see that now it's been configured to use a proxy server. So the idea again is that as I'm typing and using the browser, all of my traffic is going to get routed now via my proxy server, which in this case points to 127.0.0.1, which is my own machine, on port 8888, which is the default port that Fiddler's running on. So again, as I'm using my browser, now it's routing all of the traffic through Fiddler so Fiddler can see all of the requests that go back and forth between my client and the server. We talked about in IE9 the token loopback here. What that does is it says, even if I have traffic that's on my own machine, so I'm both the client and the server, it's still going to route that traffic through Fiddler so I can trace it. So I've got a website here on my own machine. If I were to go to that site, you can see that it's got localhost in the name, If we go back to Fiddler, however, we can see that it was still traced. Again, that's just a feature of IE9, and some of the more modern browsers will still use proxies and still be able to go through Fiddler by default. In the case where that may not work with older browsers, again, I can come up to the command line. Instead of using localhost, I can use IPv4.fiddler, for instance. And as I hit enter, now IE will see the dot in that name and believe that that is a normal internet address that needs to be proxied. So it will force it to go through Fiddler and do the trace from there.